The Old Testament reading is Ruth chapter 1, beginning with the first verse. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. The names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were from Bethlehem. But Elimelech died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one wife was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was bereft of her 2 sons and her husband. Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return to each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord grant that you find a home, each of you in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave you, or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, even if death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. So the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem, and the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her from the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
An especially fun moment last weekend. Lisa and I went to Beaufort, South Carolina for our niece's wedding. At the reception, it was outdoors, right downtown, under a tent. They had the best wedding band I have ever heard in my life, and you could hear them all over downtown Beaufort. So people are dancing and drinking. It's great fun. And I look across the way, and I see a young woman from our church. And I'm thinking, is she a coworker, the other side of the family? Is she kin somehow? So I go over to her, and I hug her, and I say, "How do you know these guys?" She said, "I don't. I was slower than you." I said, "What do you mean you don't?" She said, "Look at my feet." I look down. She's wearing flip-flops. Starts to come together. I said, "You're crashing this wedding." She said, caught. Don't turn me in. I said, oh no, I think it's cool, a familiar face from church. So glad to see you. That got me to thinking about this character of Ruth, and was she in some way a crasher of sorts? You know, when Lisa and I got married here in 1986, and we got a couple of the gifts that many couples get. It's a cross-stitch thing of this thing that Ruth says to Naomi, her mother-in-law, you know, where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. You have to process what that's about. Naomi she'd left Bethlehem and went to Moab. She was like many people come to Charlotte, right? They're kind of looking for greener pastures, you know, from a little town in West Virginia or Mississippi or Michigan or wherever. And you come to Charlotte. And so she goes to Moab, but boy, then the losses pile up. There's a famine, the economy's terrible, her husband dies, her 2 sons dies. It's not just one loss, right? It's the piling up of losses that get it. I just think about that poignant moment where Naomi is with her daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, and they're on each other's shoulders sobbing. And Naomi says, I need to go home. And Orpah does the expected thing. She says, well, bye, I love you, hope it goes well. But Ruth surprises everyone. She says, your people will be my people. Where you lodge, I will lodge. She's an outsider. She's a crasher. She's a Moabite. She doesn't know the Israelite language. She's from a totally different culture. And yet she comes. She crashes. She needed a home. She needed a little land. She needed a new family. She needed a place. She needed that town of Bethlehem. You've heard the thing, it takes a village. I'm saying in the Bible it seems to take a town. The Bible's so interesting. I thought about it. Most important things that happen in the Bible happen in a small town. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. They think that at the time of Jesus, archaeologists think, the population of Bethlehem would have been about 100. That's like a really small town. Oh, little town of Bethlehem, indeed. And then he grew up in Nazareth, and archaeologists think the population of Nazareth as Jesus was growing up was maybe about 100, like a little tiny place. Stuff happens in small towns. This got me to wondering this week if God actually intended us to live in small towns. If you know a small town, maybe you can process this. If you've always lived in a big urban area, maybe not. There's something about big urban areas. We're afflicted by so many choices and so many people. Last night, Lisa and I were trying to decide where to go to dinner. Good grief. Here. We named all kinds of places. Stress, trying to choose. There was a mob in my neighborhood yesterday. They had a big Halloween parade. It must have been 10,000 people there in costumes. It was great fun. And I wondered, in that mob, there's a lot of people, way over 100. How many of them, despite the fun they were having, were lonely? How many were lonely? Did God intend us to live in small towns? Small towns can be narrow-minded and mean sometimes, but on the whole, there's a tenderness, there's an intimacy. Small towns have their traditions. First small town I lived in, when I got out of seminary, every fall they had a corn shucking, and everybody in the town came and they shucked the corn together. It was great fun. And then at the same event, I didn't like this part as much, there was a dunking booth, and the tradition evidently was the Methodist pastor had to sit in the dunking booth. In small towns, there's always a graveyard, and most of the people in the graveyard are related to one another. A few outsiders have been allowed to be buried there, but most are related to each other. They know the people that weren't. In small towns, there's always a little diner. I grew up spending a lot of time in Oakboro, North Carolina, where my grandparents lived. There's a diner there now called Tammy's. I doubt Tammy ran that diner when I was growing up, but there was this one diner, and we ate there one time. My grandmother was the greatest cook in Western civilization. Why would anybody go to a diner? But she took me to the diner one time, and the food was no good indeed. But what was amazing is I looked around, and all these people had long finished their meal, but they weren't leaving. They were just hanging around and talking. Same thing I'd seen from my grandfather. When he retired, we'd get up in the morning and walk down to Mr. Teeter's store. It was the one store in town. I don't think he ever shopped. Surely people shopped there to keep Mr. Teeter's store open. But what happened at Mr. Teeter's store is my grandfather and other men would pull up these cane chairs, and they'd chew tobacco, and my grandfather would spit it perilously close to my feet down there, and they would argue all day long. Is it better to be Democrat or Republican? Is it better to be Methodist or Baptist? They'd argue strongly all day. They'd go home, come back the next day, do it all over again. Small towns, there's signs, old signs in small towns. In Oakboro, there's a gasoline sign. It says Esso, although the older people are nodding. Esso became Exxon like 100 years ago, but there's still an Esso sign there. There's a sign in Oakboro that says Cropsey's Beauty Parlor. Cropsey was my Aunt Cropsey. She died 30 years ago. There's still a sign there, Cropsey's Beauty Parlor. They're old signs. There's an old water tank there where somebody spray painted I Love Linda. People who live there know who Linda was, who spray painted it. In a small town, there's insider knowledge. Everybody knows everybody's business. That can be gossipy, and yet it can be a beautiful thing. If anyone's sick, everybody knows. If somebody dies, everybody goes to the funeral. I try to picture during World War II in the little town of Oakboro where my dad grew up. He and other young men went off to Europe or Asia to fight a war, and the whole town would watch for news, and when a young man would come home, the whole town would gather and rejoice. Small town. There's moral accountability in a small town. When I got out of seminary, the bishop sent me to the little town of Meisenheimer, my staff parish committee chair. Her daughter reached out to me the other day. We talked about her mother. I told her this story, which I'm about to tell you. Reed was my staff parish chair. She was the postmaster, and that meant she was the one employee in the post office, and she put the mail into a box that you came by and got. A friend of mine knew this and thought, he's a real smart aleck. He thought this would be really funny. He bought me a 6-month subscription to a magazine that I must leave unnamed. And why you're guessing it, that's on you. I don't know. So I would go to the box, and I would open it, and I'd pull this out, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So it was in a brown wrapper, so I would take it in to Reba, and I would hand it to her, and I'd say, I have an evil ex-friend. Would you throw this away? She said, yes. See, there's a moral accountability in a small town. There's even church accountability. That first church that I served, I knew who was coming to church and who wasn't before Sunday morning. People would call me and say, we're going to visit Aunt Mabel. I'm not going to be there Sunday. And if somebody missed and I didn't see them, they'd call me later that day. Well, I was sick when I got up this morning. There's accountability. It matters. All of that matters. Mary Chapin Carpenter wrote a wonderful song called I Am a Town. She imagines what would a town say about a town. My favorite lyric is the town says, I am memory and stillness. I am clinging to my ways. I am a town. Towns cling to their ways. Some towns welcome crashers and some don't. When I was in Davidson, I always think about this on Halloween. The little town of Davidson did Halloween so well. They did it so well that people would come in from other towns and park and trick or treat in our town. Now, there were people in Davidson who complained bitterly about this. Who are these people coming in? They should stay in their own town instead of coming here. I thought it was just the coolest thing. Like, we do Halloween so well, people want to come here. And it's just so much fun. Crashers. We're doing a building over here. I'm supposed to make a big announcement about the building at the end of the service. I'm just going to do it now while you hopefully you're still listening. We launched sometime back the quiet phase of a $35 million campaign. That's a ridiculous amount of money to think the church could do that. The news I can share with you today is that a lot of you here, before it even became a public campaign, heard about it and stepped up. And we have, I don't know what the sports analogy is. Like, we're on third base. The Braves have won 3 games. We're in the red zone. I don't know. We have passed the $30 million mark. Stunning. And it's up to everybody else. Now, John, when I make my theological point, what's been beautiful about that isn't the amount of money, although the amount of money matters. What's been beautiful about it is so many people that I've talked to have said to me, this is the largest gift I have ever made to anything. And it's so moving. And they say this because they say, it's because I love God. It's because I love the church. And my dream is like we would all do that. And if we all did that, I mean, we would more than pay for the building, but it would just be so much joy that we would have from that. Here's the reason I bring this up now. I think God intended us to live in small towns. There's a lot that we miss because we're not in a small town. How are we going to think about the building? It looks big if you've seen pictures of it, but I want you to reimagine that building with me and imagine that what we're going to build over there, it's a town. It's a town. There's going to be a diner, right? A little cafe. And it's going to be where people go not just to eat and then get out of there, but they're going to hang around and talk. It's going to be a place where we know each other's business. But it's not going to be gossipy. It's going to be a place where we know each other's business and we know how to fall on each other's shoulders and weep. There are going to be old signs. Churches cling to their ways. We have old stuff. Everything else is modern and new. Charlotte, everything gets torn down. They build new things. But in the church, we cling to our ways. We've got old signs that point the way to God. We're memory. We're stillness. You see, Ruth needed a town. She crashed the town of Bethlehem. She also needed a better religion. She crashed the Israelite religion. You know, we think people are spiritual, the kind of vague spirituality, but there's a content to religion, and it matters. Moabite religion, very interesting. The Moabites, they believed in God, but their gods were capricious. Like they made the people nervous all the time. They're always afraid God would strike them with a lightning bolt, something. They were nervous, and so their prayers were always just trying to placate God and keep God from harming them in some way, or maybe to do a favor for them. That's what their prayer life was all about. And their religion, when it came to people, like the vulnerable just left to rot. Like it was a cutthroat world. Like if you're not doing well, God hasn't blessed you. That's just tough for you. That's Moabite religion. I mean, I don't know who the Moabites would be today. Maybe they're the people who have all the political rage. Naomi comes back from having lost so much in Moab. They say, Naomi, and she says, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. Hebrew, it means bitter. She's lost so much. Like Moabite religion will leave you bitter. Ruth crashes the religion. Your God will be my God. And when she learns about this religion, probably from her mother-in-law at first, says, this is a very different religion. God's not capricious. God's steady. God is love. God is merciful. God is always with us. You pray not to keep God off your back or to get God to do you a favor. You pray because God's with you. God's your friend. God's always there. You can talk. God listens. God cares. It's a different kind of economy, how you treat people. I was reading the other day about this French saint from the late 1800s named Teresa of Lisieux. She died very young. And in her journals, she always wrote this phrase. She said, prayer enlarges the soul. And it's interesting, in French, the word for enlarges is the same as our word dilate. Like prayer dilates the soul. You know how it is when you go to the eye doctor. I've got to do this soon. And you go to the eye doctor and put those drops there and it dilates your pupil. And then they have to give you those ugly sunglasses to wear the rest of the day because too much light's coming in. Prayer dilates the soul. It opens you up and more light comes in. You see the light of the world. You see God's light. It's risky to do this because you'd rather just like keep the shades on and not let the light in, but God wants us to let the light in. God says, let your heart be broken by the things that break the heart of God. This is Israelite religion. This is the religion that Ruth crashes. She needs it, but she wants to be part of it as well. We care for the vulnerable. Care for those that are hurting. It's not all about us. Beautiful thing about this building, two things. One is my wedding reception was in that building. Despite that, I don't mind it being torn down at all. You're probably wondering, why was my wedding reception in this building? My in-laws, some of you know them, are teetotalers, and if we went to the country club, they have liquor there. So we had it here in this building. And an amazing thing happened. There was a wedding crasher at my wedding. We didn't know this at the time, but later we did. Phil All, photographer, he'd taken all these photos at the reception. We're looking through the book one day, and there's Aunt Sue. Yeah, there's grandmother. Yeah, it's cool. And then there's this one woman, and she's by the food table. She's wearing kind of a dowdy coat. And I said to Lisa, do you know? Lisa said, no, I don't know. I assumed she was one of your people. I'll take that. And she's there by the table with 3 children in quite a few photos. And no, we asked everybody in the family, do you know her? No. Do you know her? No. Someone later said, I saw that woman in the dowdy coat. You know what she was doing? She was grabbing all this food and putting it in the pockets of her dowdy coat at the wedding reception. I told this a few years back, and I had people say, that's terrible. I have a totally different view of this. We plunked down all of this money to Eli's to cater our very fancy wedding. Thank God Almighty there was one family that got fed that day. Instead of us, oh, here's cake. Oh, it was just a lovely thing. We had a crasher. Churches welcome crashers, always. We want the crashers to come. We want people to be part of our town. One of the cool things about this project is we're not just building a building there to be a church. It's going to be a mission base, but we're also doing something outside the walls, a couple of things. And one that's really cool is we're building a town out on Marsfield Road near the airport. Do you know this? Have you followed this? We're going to build 39 homes as part of this project. 39 families are going to become homeowners. Think what that does for the children. Think what that does for the children in that family. Now I don't know the math, but if there are 39 homes there, I don't know how many people live in 39 homes. I'm going to round it to 100. We're going to build a little town that's about the size of a little town of Bethlehem. We're going to build a town that's about the size of Nazareth. People need to live in a little town. We're going to try to have a little town right here. We're going to build another little town where we know each other's business, where we love. Crashers are welcome and encouraged to come. We're having a party here. Be part of it. Dance. Enjoy. Love. Thanks be to God.